Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Insight CIO Mike Guggamous.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. I see last night might have had an impact on a few people. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a little bit of time. We're going to talk about careers. We're going to talk about development. And we have a nice panel set up for us that's diverse across the organization. And I'm going to kick it off by letting you know that this is not something I'm particularly good at because my own career really had no plan. I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of good people that would grab me and stick me in areas and give me the opportunity to fail. And sometimes that happened, sometimes it succeeded, but across the board there were great learnings that came out of it. And with the panel that we have today, we're going to try to parlay their learnings into something of value for you and for the rest of the organization. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jack Skeries. Come on out. Jack's going to come out and introduce himself.
Hi there. Is this on? Jack Skeries. I'm a manager with the SCO today, managing field-facing sales engineering for both Central and West.
Thank you, Jack. Scott Cameron.
Good morning. I'm Scott Cameron. I'm Principal Solution Architect. I work in CDCT consulting services on the portfolio team out of Kansas City. I'm the national resource for pre-sales and incubatory Azure services.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. Tony?
Thanks, Mike. Tony Gonzalez. I'm the General Manager of Digital Innovation for the Central Region. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Andy Perkins.
And good morning, I'm Andy Perkins. I'm the director of what we call our Services Center of Excellence here at Insight, which covers our project management office, resource management office, and vendor management office. So we like the offices.
Thank you, Andy, very much. So real quick, as we start this off, we've spent some time chatting, and there were a couple key themes that came out on career development and moving around. But since we've had some activities underway inside the company, we're going to kick off with the topic of acquisition and chaos. And we'll actually start this one out, if you're okay, Scott. Sure. I'm going to go over to you. Talk a little bit about the impact of moving around between organizations and other things. Be as precise as you can on the opportunities that they present.
Yeah, thanks. So I started on the hybrid cloud team in Insight. So I'm kind of coming from the opposite direction of where you think we might be in integrating CDCT and Data Link. And I came over with that team, and we kind of spread out inside of Data Link. Maybe you could call us a beachhead, right? And what I found is there's a fantastic opportunity to help define how we deliver services in this group, where we're doing something really, really new, and that's a big focus of the organization. So for me, that's been a fantastic opportunity to really move how we do something as an organization and make a difference. So it's been a lot of fun so far.
So one of the conversations that we had on that was tied into the risk of going into new organizations and the changes there, and even branding. We had a large discussion around branding. I'm curious with the team, and anybody here chime in, what are your learnings from a career progression perspective as it applies to being part of an acquisition and what comes from that?
Well, I came over from an acquisition. Years back, I came over with the InSync acquisition, and the opportunity it presented just from day one. Coming from we were a small company, and we usually had 5 people that would do one role. In Insight, you have your operations, your finance, your HR, and by being a part of that integration, one, I got to learn a lot of parts of the business that I never would have had visibility into, so it was incredible. Plus to build some relationships and get to know people that coming in new, and now I have a face. Well, I had about 300 faces by the time it was done. But it really presented an opportunity to learn a lot about the business quickly and build relationships and have some contacts that I wouldn't have previously.
Very good.
If I can tag on it a little bit, we had a conversation about 4 9-month cycles to institute cultural change. I thought was really interesting. I think we all did. And I shared it with my team yesterday, and surprisingly, a lot of them were like, why are we waiting so long then for name changes and the whole blue metal, cardinal, InSync? People hold on to those names for a long time. Why are we waiting so long? So that was encouraging to hear, but I thought that was fascinating, and just the time it takes for everyone to get on board is an interesting topic, right?
Thank you. And so everybody understands the context for that is there is power behind the brands. And that's why the acquisitions occurred. But there's also power in being part of one, and there's a balance that has to occur between those two things. And there are a lot of discussions around what does that mean for us as we go forward? Are we a holding company? Are we sub-companies? It was actually a very, very detailed conversation. And the reality is we're working through those things at an appropriate pace for the company to make sure that we capture all of the value that we have from our clients and from those brands, while at the same time integrating into what Insight is as the whole. And it actually was a great conversation. Any commentary on that, on what it ties to from a career perspective, from a development area? One of the things that came up was taking risk. Jack, throw something out there a little bit and where you took some significant risks that you might have fallen on your face from, but it worked.
I like that you said in our conversation yesterday that when we make acquisitions, we're not acquiring a big box, right? We're acquiring people, the skill set. That's the real value of the acquisition. I remember during the Kalins acquisition, many of their leaders became our leaders throughout the organization, and I was in a pretty good spot. I was a principal in a group that was about $600 million. And I had an opportunity to be one of 4 people to be in an organic data center practice. Just us in a little capsule, right? You guys build services and artifacts so that we can start creating formality on how we deliver. And I jumped at the chance. It was not a secure thing. It was high risk, but I knew that it was something that I wanted to do, the challenge. I loved the guys that I was working with. And we did a great job there for a couple of years before we actually acquired a full-on data center practice. But it taught me a lot. It was great.
So the risk part again, go through that, because that was another very central theme. And I'll put it into my words, that no one's responsible for your career but you.
Yeah.
So ask the panel, anybody care to chime in on that, on things that you've done where you've taken risk or someone has approached you with something way out of your comfort zone that you've gone into? Anyone care to?
Yeah, I think, and I love that you're in charge of your career and nobody else is, because anything from as you're working towards a certification and going through that training, it's as teammates, it's our responsibility to say what we want our path to be, and as leaders, it's our responsibility to enable that, right? And when presented an opportunity, you need to make the most of it. And I had the opportunity to kind of change roles. As I mentioned, I'm part of our project management office, but taking the opportunity in a different role to go over to our technical services as a service manager for solutions and offerings really was, it was scary. It was completely out of my comfort zone. It was a risk. I wasn't sure how the team, me not having as strong of a technical background, how that would go. But it was well worth it, and it gave me a whole new perspective on how we deliver, and it really just helped me become more well-rounded and build stronger relationships in different part of the business. And it could have not gone well, and it could have been, hey, you're not an architect, but everybody came on board, and it was really great.
We did talk about, excuse me, how important risk is, right? Everyone, probably in this room, but for sure on this panel, shared that one story of taking some huge risk. Tempered at times, right? But I remember I spent a long time at Microsoft, and I was talking about how my whole reputation was kind of rolled up, and it was uncomfortable leaving. But I felt I was in a role, it wasn't as challenging as I'd like it to be. I want to do something else, and I left without really having a plan. And then turned to Liam Spaeth, who's the founder of Blue Metal, for those of you who don't know him, on the way home. It was just very serendipitous. But we can all probably pick like 2 or 3 points in our career where like, oh my God, that just set me off on a completely different trajectory. And yeah, I wouldn't be standing here today or sitting here today without that decision, but it's really uncomfortable, right? And then I think doing it more often makes it a little more comfortable. You start taking more risk, and there's more reward there.
Yeah, I think when I first put my LinkedIn account together, I was like, oh my gosh, how many jobs have I had at Insight, right? I wanted to break it all out. There's probably 8 of them. Anytime I've been given a chance to jump in or do something organic or develop something in the company, I've jumped at the chance. Like this panel, you mentioned that this morning. 1,800 people were streaming to this to, in front of all of our peers. It could be pretty nerve-wracking.
I forgot about that part, Jack.
Right?
Thanks.
We were
Yeah,
doing
you're
so well for getting this.
Now he's sweating.
Yeah.
But I jumped at the chance to be up here with leaders in our organization that are putting this thing together for the next phase of Insight, to be with our CIO, to be in front of our peers. It's an awesome honor. So I jumped right at it.
So I guess taking risks has been a theme throughout my career since the very, very beginning. I actually count the start of my career as a real risk-taking. I was actually assembling white box computers in a small little white box distribution place in Lawrence, Kansas, and one of the guys on my team knew a guy, and he went off and he had an interview, and we thought he was just gone, and he came back one day and he said, hey, there's an opportunity for another one of these positions, and there were like 5 of us in the room, and I said, me, I want to go. I didn't even know what it was at that point, and I went. It had to be better than what I had, right? So I went and I took the interview, and that was my start in, kind of management consulting, a competitor to Anderson Consulting. And from there, it just kind of set the tone of, hey, there's an opportunity. Let's go do it. From at one point starting my own business to jumping to Microsoft so I could get some of that large enterprise experience. And then jumping off of my last company when I had it pretty good, but it was a fantastic opportunity to come do something new with Azure here at Insight. So it's been a real theme, and it's rewarded me.
I'm going to put a little context behind these as well on the questions. So you have a budding rock star up here that went from a deep education in music, playing in clubs, all these other things, to suddenly self-taught on the technical side. Had to pay bills at some point in time. And you had people that jumped into organizations without any background whatsoever because the opportunity availed itself. And they did it on the technical side, they did it on the managerial side, so huge amounts of risk that they took on themselves, but in the background, there was actually someone helping coach them and push them along the way, which will go in the next section. And I'll give a little personal context on that, and it's something that we bonded over. I was working at Motorola in manufacturing on 3rd shift, and I got tapped on the shoulder one day, and they said, you speak Russian? I said, yes. Do you want to go to Russia? Sure, for what? We need to hire 1,600 software engineers in St. Petersburg. So next thing I knew, I was splitting my time for 18 months between the US and Russia, hiring 1,600 software engineers coming out of the military from when the Russian oligarchy, all these other bits and pieces were breaking apart after the Soviet Union fell apart. Totally unqualified, aside from the language, had no idea what we were going to do or where any of these things went together, but took the risk and went over and did it. And at the time, I had a fellow back in Schaumburg, Illinois, that I had a question, I could get on the phone and call them at any time, help mentor me through that process. So learned an incredible amount, it was outstanding, and that was another common theme that came through here was the mentorship. And people willing to invest in you on the opportunity for risk. Anybody care to give an example or go through the personal experience in those places?
I'm afraid to jump in because I don't want to follow the Russian story. I told you backstage
It's
that
so good.
I can't compete with Russian. I can't, but we talked backstage. I'm super passionate about mentoring, right? I hope my team knows this, they should, but mentoring and one-on-ones are the best way to understand the organization, understand how to play within it, and be successful in it, right? We should probably take a vote. I'm curious to know if we can see, but do people have mentors? Who here has a mentor? It's okay. It's actually not bad. I said more than I thought. And it's going to come as quite a surprise with my gray hair, and probably everyone, I'm sure, looking at me thinks I know everything there is to know about this. But I'm going to call
You
Stan
didn't know
out a
what
little
time
bit.
we were supposed to meet this
Then
morning.
what's
Hey,
interesting
no,
is
no.
I
That's
saw a
fair.
bunch of
Thank
our
you.
executives up front
I
raise their
know.
hand.
Well, that's
Even they've got mentors.
I'm going to call Stan out because I actually just asked him recently to be my mentor, and he said yes graciously, and it's really comfortable. It's not, hey, here's our agenda. Let's just get on the phone. What's going on? How's it going? And I appreciate that, and I think everyone should be encouraged to do the same thing. That, and make sure your one-on-ones are happening regularly with your manager, and don't fall in the pitfall like most people do, where the manager just tells you what they need for the next week. No, the manager should be encouraging. Like, what do you need from me? How can I remove roadblocks? What do you need to get my career moving forward or take me to my path I want? That stuff should be happening really regularly, so I encourage that very much.
Yeah, and I think with mentor, there's the formal mentors, as you mentioned, your example here with Stan, but there are a lot of opportunities for informal mentors too. I would say I probably have like 8 mentors throughout the organization right now, depending on the different areas of the business. I work with architects that are in the data center space to help me understand as new technologies are coming and help me get better. And I have people on the software side that I work with, and people within Microsoft that really can give us each different perspective. I have sales mentors, so to really help you understand each side of things, that's something both formal from a same focus perspective, but also informal as well.
Well, so I'm going to take off that. There's a lot of people that have come to me, Azure, it's a new thing, and just pick up the phone and say, what is this? And it's like, okay, let's sit down and have a half-hour conversation. I'm happy to do that. How do I sell this? How is this going to change what I'm doing? What do I need to know about what you're doing? I haven't gotten enough information, and there can be a lot about being a technical mentor. You can be a career mentor. I've had all kinds of mentors throughout my career, starting with my parents, through peers, through managers. I think they're very important.
Yeah, I think we stand on the shoulders of a lot of other people, don't we? I think there's leadership where you look for it. If your eyes are open, you can learn, right? Try to humble yourself a little bit so that you can maybe take other people's perspective, even if maybe you don't agree with it. There's always something to learn, I've found. And if I think about mentorship, I've never asked anyone to be my mentor, but I've had a lot of them, which I was fortunate. And they were those mentor moments that made the most impact for me was when it wasn't me coming to them saying, hey, how does the world work? And they go, well, let me tell you the ways. It was, hey, man, I need you to do this thing. And I'm not asking, I just need you to get on out there. And they shoved me on stage.
For example.
Kind of like you're strapping yourself to the rocket story about Russia, right? And those moments were sink or swim, but they really had a massive change for my career. They gave me a trajectory where ultimately then I ended up doing that more and finding maybe a superpower in that thing that I didn't know about myself.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I have several. None of them are official. 2 of them are in the room right now. One of them I've known for probably 20 years, and we get along well. We argue, we do all kinds of stuff, but we give feedback back and forth. Sometimes it's appreciated, sometimes not, but it's the fact that you have someone to balance and go back and forth with is very important. Looking out in the room, how many people here actually have someone that you talk to? And again, it doesn't have to be someone you agree with, but it's someone that you trust and you go and have detailed conversations with. Raise your hands. Well, then everybody has a mentor, right? It's very important to go look at those things. And that ties into another part that the team was talking about, the balance between the technical and the non-technical. And with this one, I'd like to pop over to Scott real quick to go through, because even your title is purely technical as you go and you take a look at it. Without leading the witness, talk about that a little bit. Pull in the audience, pull in the other folks here on that balance between the technical and the non-technical.
So, there's a lot of engineers here, architects, and you know how hard it is to stay up to date on technology, and especially in the cloud. I'm not saying that it's not that way everywhere else, but especially it feels to me like when I'm in Azure and I see a new notice for a new feature come out, every 3 days, and this one's in incubation, this one's public release, and oh my gosh, this one changed what I did last week and makes it totally, out of date. It's incredibly important to stay up to date, but how do you do that? Well, you do that by knowing a lot of smart people that you can talk to and doing a lot of your own homework and research. But I can't learn all that on my own and know what's important to know. So, for me, I've had a number of mentors here. Matt Missy, you guys know Matt Missy has been fantastic. David Lewerke was my first manager, and going through with them, here's technically where we expect you to go, what you need to develop as you start to become, an Azure, principal architect, what do you need to know? And technically that's been fantastic, but then, career is totally different. They've had good information there, but, career for me has been peers, managers, like I said, even before my own parents kind of broke the ground for me in having their own business and made it possible for me to go out and take that risk by giving me that knowledge that it is possible to go out and do something on your own and be successful, and helping me through that. So it's been important to have all kinds of different mentors.
Mm-hmm. And Jack, since you were the one swinging the axe back in the day, that's our former musician, by the way. He's still a musician, but he's not shredding it like he used to. So you went and did a massive flip between music to technical and then into some larger managerial type things. Do you mind talking about that a little bit, and then maybe for Tony and Andy to chime in on that as well?
I try to think of it as a reinvention, right? So I was in traditional background IT since the beginning. I was never going to be in the corporate world. I was never going to be a walking dead, I think is what I called people that worked in the corporate world. Now look at me.
The ones who wore suits and suit coats specifically.
That's right, carrying the briefcases down Michigan Avenue in Chicago. I had hair like this long. I was always going to have long hair, by the way.
So are you calling us zombies? Is that what this is?
But I poured myself into it. I didn't take it. I didn't do cover songs. It was going to be, look, if you're going to do this, pour all your passion, your mind, your energy into it. And I always said to other people, family and otherwise, I said, if I poured all the energy that I put into trying to make it as a musician professionally into anything else, I could be successful in it. So I felt like at the end of that career, about 27 years old, and I go, man, I don't have any skills other than, what am I going to do, teach guitar lessons for $8 an hour? I'm living in Chicago, who's kidding who, right? It's very expensive. So I saw somewhere in the newspaper, $45,000 with no experience if you had an MCSE. I thought, man, is that a lot of money? I could be so rich. I think I was making like $12,000 at the time. I went and put myself into a night school that was supposed to be 14 months, but within 3 months, I had a job at the largest PR firm. I learned a lot from the guy who really invented public relations, Daniel J. Edelman. He was about 80 years old at the time. He wouldn't go anywhere without me because I knew about stage work. So when he was up in front of Life magazine or whatever, talking to them about the internet with a cable going back to the dial-up, he wanted me there to make sure it went well. Within like 2 years, my boss turned to me and said, okay, I can see you're taking certs like crazy. You're gobbling up this. You're trying to climb. I can see you're going to leave. I never told him I was going to leave. He said, hang with me for a year. I hired you with no experience. You kind of owe that to me, but I'll give you some data center experience. I ended up staying for a year, walked across the street, got into a federal bank, took on a project that was 2 little servers that no one wanted to touch because it was high visibility, and it ended up becoming a $1 billion a day secondary mortgage market company program. I talked to some guys from Blue Metal, ironically, at lunch the other day, and they had worked for Avanade. We were spending about $1 million a month in consulting, and I learned a great deal from guys like Avanade. He remembered that program. He was like, you were with the bank? I remember you guys were a huge customer. I loved you guys. But guys from Compaq, guys from Dell Technologies at the time, Avanade and others were all around me, so I was like with the best, and I really got a kind of indoctrination on data center from that.
Good, thank you, Jack. But Jack is extraordinarily articulate, and one of the key things to point out in this, and I want to call it out, there's 2 themes that everybody should have caught up on by now. One is self-driven, period. You go out. The other one is risk. They're just profound in every conversation that we've had on this topic when we've gone out and looked for it. Thank you very, very much for that, Jack. Tony, Andy?
I can do that, yeah. I mean, I draw upon my experience from when I was pretty young getting through college, right? I built burial vaults for several years to get myself through college.
Would you say that again?
Burial vaults. So in the Midwest, you know, when you put a casket in the ground, you need cement to protect it over the years. So I built several of them as a younger man. I hated the job. I absolutely hated the job, but I need the money. I grew up, you know, meager means. But what it does, it really instilled a little more of a risk mentality than maybe I would have had I not had this job. But I talked about leaving Microsoft, and there's been a few times I've thrown a wrench in my career, and on purpose almost. But I draw upon that experience where you weren't afraid to leave. When somebody said, hey, you want to leave, it's called Wilbur Burial Vault Company. When you leave in Wilbur, I'm like, no, I couldn't get out of here fast enough. I hate it. I was ready for that next job, and then you get wrapped up in life, and you have kids and all that fun stuff, and now Microsoft. When I was ready to leave, I went back to Wilbur, and I'm like, there's always something else, right? There's something to look forward to. And I did absolutely that. I'm like, hey, you know, I don't like my job anymore. I'm going to leave it without any plan, and I did that, and thank God it paid off. But that's why I got a call from the folks at Blue Metal, and we set up the new Chicago office. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned the example of the risk as it relates to moving from something you're comfortable in into the uncomfortable, which as I think about every opportunity that's been presented, I've obviously never done it before, or it wouldn't be an opportunity there. So a huge part of risk there. And as you look at the part of owning your career, I think that's really, really important. I believe those were the two areas you said for us to touch on. Anything, believe it or not, as project managers, we're kind of goal-driven. Like, we like steps. We like to check things off of lists. And so it was kind of in my blood to do that. You know, like, oh, I need to get my CAPM certification. I got to get my PMP, and what's next, and what's next. And I mean, nobody was telling me to do those things. It was like, how can I do that? And I went to my manager, and so then they could help enable me in how I did that. But that was a big part of it, in finding out what drove me and how I could bring that into other parts of the organization and work with my team.
Excellent. Thank you. How many folks out here self-enroll in continued learning, be it on a technical scale or managerial or whatever? Almost everybody. How many people think it's a responsibility of the company versus yourself? How many people think it's a responsibility of the company? I see one hand up in the back. I think that was sarcastic, but I appreciate it.
Like we're leading the witness.
Or extremely brave. Yeah.
We'll talk after. How many, I mean, genuinely, because we're looking for some feedback. We'd like to have a discussion. We have some folks here that have great experience. I do apologize for the reflection off the head. I know the bald guys have said that several times the last couple days. But how many people here sincerely think it's 100% you, or is there a balance? And that's where I'll push a little bit. Pardon?
Balance.
It's a balance. Would you articulate that for a moment? What do you mean?
I invest in my own training in technology and so forth in areas that I'm interested in. But there are other things that the company wants me to learn, and I expect them to cover that side of things.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. Yep. You get something out of my pocket when we link up, because you have the chutzpah to say something quicker than anybody else. How about that? What is that balance? Are you guys stymied on this one?
Might be.
No, I don't think so. You know, I kind of hit on it a little bit earlier. There's a lot of self-starting out there, you know, what's going to come next, but it's hard to know what's going to come next, what's important for me to learn. So there's been a lot of reaching out and saying, you know, here's what I think I need to do, and talking to someone who knows more than I do, or someone who's been there and saying, you know, what do you think? I'm trying to go learn, you know, help me understand where I should focus. And it needs to be me initiating, but it's absolutely okay for me to go out and get some guidance and figure out, you know, where should I focus? I don't want to go way down this rat hole over here and get myself something that might be cool but doesn't get me anywhere. It's not going to get me where I want to go. So it's really got to be a blend of going out and getting some help. And it's also, as an organization, as leaders, I think it is our responsibility to help guide those who are in our groups and give them some areas to focus on. Maybe not say, learn this, this, and this necessarily, but to say, here's somewhere that you really might think focusing, and let's talk about where you want to go in your career. What do you want to develop into? Do you want to be a fantastic technical architect? Do you want to be a solutions architect and get up in front of groups? And okay, well, if you're going to do that, here are some things you should think about. And if you're going to do this, maybe you should focus in some of these areas. It doesn't have to be prescriptive and exact, but I think that guidance is important.
Good. Anyone else?
Your career's a journey, someone told me, right? Not a destination. So there is no stopping point. So my balance changes all the time. I think when I was more technical, I was a delivery person. It was learn as much as I can to make sure that clients are happy, that the systems that I put together are solid and stay solid for a long time so people are happy, right? When you become a supervisor or you're in the practices, those balances change. I need to know first what I don't know. Be aware of what I don't know. Know what you don't know so that you're at least aware of where not to step. And then always learning new things. Now as a manager, I've got a manager of a very technical team, some of the best people we have. So I've got to keep up with them, which is very tough. And then also learn a lot of new skills, right? To manage people or engineer people's careers, help them out, make sure they're getting what they need, keep them motivated. That's a whole new learning skill, right? So, and I'm getting better at it. I'm not great at it, but I'm getting better.
Thank you, Jack. Andy, Tony?
I was thinking of a story I could share real quick, but I was sitting with my team a little bit yesterday. It was Ben Amal, Dan, Adam, I think, out there. And you may have seen them showing off a lot of IoT things, and they're really compelling. They're very cool stuff. You see trees on stage and boxes, and everyone's like, oh, that's really cool stuff. And people are gravitating towards these folks just to ask about this work they're doing and kind of excited about doing similar work. And I was kind of asking questions about that, and they kind of confused me. They took me for a little bit of a twist, but I was asking them, what do they like about their job so much? And all of them came back and basically said the people. It wasn't the box, it wasn't the tree, it wasn't the code. They all just genuinely liked the people, and I thought that was an interesting thing I wanted to share, but it kind of threw me for a loop. But I appreciate their honesty. It was a really good discussion.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to throw something out here. It's kind of a bomb. So the team was talking about it, but they didn't want to bring it up. How many people here have worked for someone that you didn't particularly care for at one time or another?
Today, too? Do we have
Today?
to admit?
Not today.
I'm not
Love
passing
my
judgment
boss.
on my present employment.
Is
Just so
Matt,
everybody
is
knows
Matt
that.
here? I don't know.
Love my boss. Love my boss.
So this is a good one. How many people have had to navigate through a difficult manager? I'll ask it in a different way. Very, very good. So please discuss.
I think it's a really volatile question to ask right here in front of our own managers. Right out. Can I turn the question to you? Have you ever had a difficult manager? I don't know if Ken's in the audience.
Never at Insight.
All right, good.
Wow. Good answer.
Yes, I've had a very difficult manager at different times. Matter of fact, just prior to joining Insight, this is true, I had several folks that I was responsible to. And how many people know Motorola? Okay, at one time it was Global Fortune 47. It was one of the top 3 most valuable brands in the world during the 90s. It's not that way today. It's changed. It's modified dramatically. I was one of the executives that led the breakup of the company. And we broke it off into a multitude of multi-billion-dollar segments. And through that process, I'm not going to call the person out. They're very good, very well respected in industry. At one time, they were one of the highest paid executives in the world. Very driven. And you talk about people. People were not the objective for very good reasons. They had to hit strict financial performance measures. We had to have strict spin-offs completed in a certain period of time or huge financial implications from a tax basis for the company. And I reported into 2 different CEOs within the same company. Wow. Plus I had responsibilities for 2 different chief technical officers and strategy officers. It was a unique environment, and I had a lady by the name of Leslie Jones who pulled me to the side once and said, Mike, never forget that this too shall pass, and that their objectives are far beyond what we can understand. And I learned something. She was coaching me. She is one of my mentors. She was coaching me, not because I said anything or did anything. She was sharing her own frustration at the moment. Because one side was completely different in their drivers. The other side, completely different from the other, right? I don't know a different way to say it. One was pure objectives. The other one was pure retention of people. They didn't want to lose the key talent in the organization. The other one had to hit strict timelines on spinning off a $12.5 billion business, or otherwise it would personally cost them tens of millions. And the one thing I learned in there is when I could just step back and sit and listen to what this person was saying, I understood where they were coming from. So actually putting myself into their shoes for a period of time. The other thing I did was look at it from a learning perspective. This too shall pass. I knew I had 18 months to go through that particular position, and I ended up respecting this person immensely coming through it. But for the first 6 months, I'm being vague by intent. For the first 6 months, it was brutal. I mean, there were half a dozen times I was talking to recruiters going, I gotta get out of here. But when I stepped back and just looked at what they were doing and the magnitude of the objectives that they had, it was probably one of the better learning experiences I've ever had in my career. And that I think is a pervasive message as well. When things go well, how much do you guys learn? Who thinks that you learn the most when things are going stellar?
No.
No? Who thinks you learn the most when things are extraordinarily difficult? It was extraordinarily difficult. Without question, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had professionally. Anybody else care to chime in?
Yeah, I think, well, both. So from a difficult manager perspective, and I think you keyed in on something very important about really understanding where they're coming from and both sides. Like, I think any leader, well, it would have been a manager, not a leader, but that I would have had at that time never really took the time to understand where I was coming from, or maybe my strengths, and because we had such a lack in communication, I never really had that trust to know what their vision or what they were going for from that perspective. And then as it comes to failure, 100%, I mean, I think I learn something new every day, and it's not because I'm doing something right every day. So I'm learning all the time. And when I think about some of my biggest failures, it's really been the trust that I've ended up building out of that. So if I think about, I had a project, and this is gonna make me sound, age myself a bit, but way back when LCS was a thing and they did like the Lighthouse program, I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I mean, it was one of my first projects I was managing, and I mean, we did terrible planning, which I'll admit, right? But we made a mistake. We thought something was simpler than it was, and did our cutover 1 a.m. and but I had to own it. Like, that was what the most important thing was. So I owned it. I called our president at the time, and what I learned from that was we all owned it together. We were troubleshooting at 2 a.m. I had our president and all of our senior directors, and we were all just trying to work through it from 2 to 4. And I had to call, I had to do it, but they gave me the ability to fail and then the support to own it together to make it right.
Excellent. Thank you.
So I think that adversity lowers the bar and makes it easier to take risks in some cases. And a challenging environment, a challenging manager, whatever, gives you, if you need one, an excuse to make a change, to do something new, to challenge yourself. For me, there was a huge challenge early in my career around when Microsoft released Windows 2000. I just got my MCSE 4.0, and I was going hard down the technical track, being very, very technical. And I had a manager who was downright abusive. And I just dreaded every interaction with this guy. And eventually it got to the point where I walked out of a meeting, and it might have been career ending if I hadn't quit.
You realize it
Before
was?
you fire me.
So, but what it did lead to was it led to a different branch in my career where I went and got my Microsoft certified trainer, and I got used to standing up in front of large groups of people and training. And by the way, when I did that, I got to know the material fantastically well because these people brought me all kinds of weird stuff that I'd never thought of before. And it just led me down a totally different direction and helped me make the change that I think really needed to happen at that point.
Excellent.
I thought it was interesting that you kind of took the turn of, worst manager, but I learned something, because that was what I was going to say. When I was first hired at Insight, I came from the client side because I knew a lot about a subject that they wanted to build practices around, and put me out in the field, and then very quickly put me under this guy that brilliant master's in business from University of Chicago, had come from big consulting, so really understood a lot of consulting that was way over my head at the time, and I was just kind of drowning in all this knowledge, but terrible people person, he'd kind of guy that like call you into an office meeting, and he would have a headphones in and go, yeah, I swear I can have 2 meetings at once. So he'd be asking you a question, and as you're answering it, he's like listening to someone else on the, it was just, but at the time, I put my feelings aside, realized this is about my job and function, and really went, look, there is something to learn from this, so squeeze the sponge, right? Get as much as I can from this experience, and I'll figure out the feelings thing later. I met some great mentors from that pulled me out of that situation, but looking back, I learned a heck of a lot from that person.
Excellent. Thank you very, very, very much. So team, there's a couple big takeaways. 1, it's up to you. 2, yes, you should be getting guidance from the company. You should be getting guidance from your manager and push forward. Risk. You have to take it. You have to put yourself out there if you want to go forward. It doesn't matter if it's technical training or professional training. The other one is find somebody that you can talk to, bounce things off of. It doesn't have to be a lovey, cushy-feely relationship. It should be something with tension to it that can push you and drive you. And the other thing is, take a look at the bright side of life. Oftentimes, if you're in a difficult situation, it might be because it's a great growth opportunity for you, and go through it, push back, take it for what it is. I meant what I said. One of the worst experiences I had actually turned out to be one of the best learning experiences I've had professionally, and I respect that individual today immensely. So with that, I'd like to thank the panel for the participation and having the courage to say yes and take the risk of coming out here today. So thank you.